What if I told you that the secret of freedom is not in achieving anything, but in giving up almost everything? You spend your whole life trying to fit in. Model your speech, your clothes, your choices, all in search of approval. You bend in the face of expectations that aren't even yours. And little by little, he moves away from who he really is. You fear being judged. He seeks validation in looks that change with each season. And you cling to the idea that your value depends on how the world sees you. But what if everything you've been taught about caring too much is exactly what's stopping you from living? What if the key to confidence, freedom, and even success is not in controlling everything, but in letting go? Michel de Montaigne, a 16th century thinker, delved into this paradox. As the world around him crumbled into war, he retreated to a silent tower, not to escape, but to observe the human soul. His essays did not seek to indoctrinate, but to liberate. And his philosophy, far from being theoretical, is a practical compass for those who wish to live with lightness, authenticity, and inner peace. Montaigne challenged what we understand by success. He questioned the need to please, and he pointed out a path, that of detachment. In this video, we're going to go through that path. Let's look at the anxiety to please, the fear of failure, the addiction to control. And with Montaigne as your guide, discover what happens when you simply stop caring about what never really mattered. From an early age, we are taught to believe that if we control everything, we will be safe. Safe from error, judgment, failure. As if life were an exact equation, and all it took was effort, planning, and concern to keep everything in order. But Montaigne, observing the human condition with serene eyes and without illusions, saw something that few have the courage to admit. Control, most of the time, is a fantasy. We live in a constant attempt to master the uncontrollable, what others think, what might happen, how we will be perceived. And in this Herculean effort, we end up wasting our most vital energy, the one that could be focused on creation, on presence, on love. Montaigne almost died in a horse-riding accident, and this experience confronted him with the absolute fragility of life. He understood that no planning, no precautions, no obsessive worry would have saved him from that accident. Paradoxically, it was at that moment that something became clear. Living is not controlling. Living is accepting the flow. He wrote, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." This phrase dismantles an entire modern mentality. How much anguish do you carry over scenarios that never came to fruition? How many nights have you wasted trying to predict the future or correct the past? How many dialogues did you rehearse in your mind hoping to control reactions that never came? The truth is that the struggle for control separates us from reality. It stops us from listening to what life is saying now. And ironically, the more we try to hold the reins, the more unstable everything seems to become. Montaigne invites us to look at this obsession with tenderness, and then, gently, let go. Because life, in its essence, is not a machine to be operated. It is a living organism, full of surprises. And it only flourishes for those who have the courage to dance with the unpredictable. There is an invisible force that silently guides many of our steps, the desire to be accepted. From childhood, we learn that approval is a reward, a look of pride, a compliment, a sign of belonging. And so, little by little, we begin to build our identity around what pleases others. But Montaigne saw clearly where this path leads, to an inner labyrinth. Because when we live according to other people's acceptance, we lose touch with what is truly ours. He wrote to understand himself, not to convince. I wasn't looking for applause, but authenticity. And perhaps that's why his texts resonate to this day, because Montaigne had the rare courage to think for himself in a world that screamed for conformity. The search for validation is subtle. It's in the choice of clothes, in the omission of an opinion, in constant adaptation to the environment. We don't want to bother you, You don't want to disappoint. But by avoiding the discomfort of others, we place ourselves in prison. And the most tragic thing, when that validation finally comes, it doesn't satisfy, because it was not directed at our true selves, but at the mask we wear to be accepted. Montaigne proposes another way, that of knowing yourself so much, accepting yourself so completely, that other people's opinions lose their power to hurt or shape. He invites us to ask, who are you trying to please, and why? How many decisions in your life, professional, emotional, existential, were made out of fear of judgment and not out of true desire? When you stop looking for acceptance everywhere, you discover something rare, acceptance of yourself. And from then on, relationships become more honest, decisions are lighter, and life silently yours. There is an invisible force that silently guides many of our steps, the desire to be accepted. From childhood, we learn that approval is a reward, a look of pride, a compliment, a sign of belonging. And so, little by little, we begin to build our identity around what pleases others. But Montaigne saw clearly where this path leads, to an inner labyrinth. Because when we live according to other people's acceptance, we lose touch with what is truly ours. He wrote to understand himself, not to convince. I wasn't looking for applause, but authenticity. And perhaps that's why his texts resonate to this day, because Montaigne had the rare courage to think for himself. In a world that screamed for conformity, the search for validation is subtle. It's in the choice of clothes, in the omission of an opinion, in constant adaptation to the environment. We don't want to bother you. You don't want to disappoint. But by avoiding the discomfort of others, we place ourselves in prison. And the most tragic thing, when that validation finally comes, it doesn't satisfy, because it was not directed at our true selves, but at the mask we wear to be accepted. Montaigne proposes another way, that of knowing yourself so much, accepting yourself so completely, that other people's opinions lose their power to hurt or shape. He invites us to ask, who are you trying to please, and why? How many decisions in your life, professional, emotional, existential, were made out of fear of judgment and not out of true desire? When you stop looking for acceptance everywhere, you discover something rare, acceptance of yourself. And from then on, relationships become more honest, decisions are lighter, and life silently yours. Contrary to what many think, detachment is not coldness. It is not indifference nor apathy. Detachment is clarity. It's the wisdom of distinguishing between what deserves your energy and what just consumes you. It's knowing how to let go, not because it doesn't matter, but because it's no longer worth holding on to. Montaigne understood this paradox deeply. He observed how people lived trapped in results, expectations, idealized images of themselves, and how this generated constant tension, corrosive anxiety. But he did not propose giving up life. On the contrary, he proposed living lightly. Act with dedication, but without obsession. Love without possessiveness. Search without getting lost along the way. In his retreat, he wrote, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. Not to be recognized, but to understand yourself. It is in this space of compulsive non-effort, in this creative void, that the soul flourishes. How many times in your life have you achieved something just when you stopped trying? When did you stop trying to convince, impress, conquer? It is as if the universe responded to the delivery with harmony. This is the paradox of detachment. The less you need to prove, the more natural your presence becomes. The less you try to control, the more things will fall into place on their own. And it's not about luck, it's presence. It is coherence between what you feel, think, and do. It's the magnetism of someone who has already found a home within themselves and no longer needs to beg for acceptance from the outside. Montaigne was not an ascetic, not a tragic hero. He was a man deeply aware of his flaws, and perhaps that's why he was so wise. He experienced significant losses. 5 of their 6 children died in infancy. His best friend, Etienne de la Boétie, died young. And the country in which he lived sank into civil wars and religious disputes. But the pain and disillusionment did not make him cynical. They made it more real. Instead of toughening up, he chose to withdraw. He left politics. He moved away from positions of power, and he retired to his tower, a space of silence, books, and meditation. There, among wooden corridors and Latin phrases inscribed on the ceiling of his library, he began what he called the study of himself. Not to exalt yourself, but to accept yourself. In his essays, Montaigne exposed his soul honestly. He confessed his vanities, his fears, his inconsistencies. And it is precisely this vulnerability that makes it universal. He wrote, "I don't portray myself completely, just how I see myself at this moment." This phrase carries a liberating truth. No one is constant. Nobody is perfect. Everything is in motion. Accepting this is abandoning the armor. It is to stop acting out an ideal version of yourself, to finally inhabit your own humanity. In today's world, where everyone seems to compete for an image of success, coherence, and perfection, Montaigne appears as an antidote. He reminds us that to be human is to contradict yourself. Changing your mind is a sign of inner life. Accepting imperfection does not weaken us, free us. If there is a field where detachment reveals its true strength, it is in human relationships. Montaigne, with his deep and disillusioned gaze, observed how we became hostages to each other, not out of true love, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of not being enough. How many times have you tried to mold someone into your image? How many times have you been frustrated because the other person didn't live up to an expectation that perhaps he didn't even know existed? Montaigne understood that relational suffering does not arise from the differences between people, but the attempt to control, to arrest, to correct. In his texts, he spoke about his friendship with La Boétie, a connection that didn't demand, it just was. This friendship was, for Montaigne, a revelation of what is possible when you love someone without trying to possess them. When you allow the other to be, without becoming a mirror of our insecurities. He proposes to us a rare ideal, relationships based on presence, not collection, in surrender, not in dominance. And here is the paradox. The more you try to hold someone back, the more they slip away. But the more you allow the other to be, the more they choose to remain. Freedom in relationships does not mean the absence of bonds. It means the refusal to transform others into a reflection of your own needs. Ask yourself, how many of your relationships are based on the fear of losing, rather than the joy of sharing? The answer may hurt, but it can also liberate. There's a silent moment, almost imperceptible, when something inside us just lets go. It's not giving up. It's not weakness. It is a kind of wisdom that does not come from reason, but from a sacred exhaustion. It's the moment you realize you can't control everything, that you don't need to prove yourself all the time, that carrying so many worries doesn't make sense anymore. Montaigne knew this moment well, and it is from him that his philosophy flourishes. He did not propose passivity, but an action free from anguish, an engaged life, but free from guarantees. He understood that there is a deep peace, which is only born when you stop resisting the impermanence of the world. And this is the revelation. The more you let go, the lighter you become. And the lighter you are, the more the world begins to naturally align with your presence. Perhaps harmony has never depended on effort, but the delivery. Maybe the universe never demanded perfection, just presence. Maybe true freedom begins at just the right moment, where you stop caring about what was never yours to control, And if this touched something inside you, maybe it's because it's time to let go too. To let go of what weighs, to make space for what is real. If this message made sense to you, leave your mark here. Comment, share, subscribe to the channel. We are just beginning this journey, and if you are going to walk, do it lightly.